So thanks everyone for joining us today for the webinar on template components. It's Kamala here, and I'm here with Craig, be the ones doing the webinar today. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to ask them in the question panel. We will both try to keep our eyes on it and answer them as we go. And we're also going to be recording the webinar today, and we'll send you a link after the fact if you want to watch it again or if you want to pass it on to anyone else that missed the presentation. So here's a quick outline of what we're going to be covering today. It's going to be a hopefully nice and fast webinar. Craig will talk about the template editor, creating and testing templates and components. He'll talk about surfaces and layers. Talk about template processing and the merge surface, template component examples, and he'll also talk about the fixed section editor as well. Pretty short introduction today. Today's webinar is going to be done in two modules of RoadEng, the terrain module and location module. Template components are mostly in the location module though. And just before I pass on to Craig, here is a list of the upcoming webinars if you'd like to take a look and sign up for any of all of them. And I think that's all I have to say. I'll pass things on to Craig and he'll talk some more about template components.
Thanks, Cam. I'm just getting my screen back here. There we go. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. So today's topic is about template components, and my presentation is going to be sort of an introductory level, but I'm going to try and cover some fundamental concepts that would carry you into more advanced features of template components. I think they're kind of things that trip people up quite a bit, so I'm going to be emphasizing them, and I apologize if this is a little bit too novice for some of you. Bear with me. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump around a little bit. I'm not going to go through one example from beginning to end. I'm going to have to jump around. So I'm trying to illustrate some concepts. So the example I've decided to work with here, it was actually a rural highway. It's got a very simple cross section you can see here, and it's got two layers below ground. One is some sort of soil layer, and then below that is a rock layer, very simple. And in RoadEng, changing templates. By the way, templates are, if you're Civil 3D, more familiar with Civil 3D, templates in RoadEng are equivalent to assemblies in Civil 3D, and components are similar to sub-assemblies. So just a slightly different terminology. Anyway, in RoadEng, templates are dealt with in what's called the template editor. So I'll go into Edit Templates, and this pops up a window which shows your cross-section at the station which you had selected before you get in there. And what the template editor does, and I get asked this question a lot, is when I show people that I'm going to move the template around on the cross-section, they get worried that I'm changing the alignment. That's not the case. This is really like a sandbox where you can investigate how a template behaves in different ground situations. So here we're at 2780. I can move through to different stations, pick my template up and say, how would it behave down here below ground? Oh, I see. Okay, so it's just an environment that you can play around with. So in this example, I've actually got three templates that are active in this example. I've got the default one, which you can see here. I've got another one, which is a slightly different type of road configuration, and I've got a third one, which is an urban type of cross-section. So these things here are templates, and those are the things that you're going to assign to ranges of stations. I'll do that in just a second, but these are the templates, and inside the templates are what we call components, template components. And I'm going to talk more about these, but that's the basic structure of what we've got here. Down here are essentially they're folders that contain components, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. You can't assign template folders. You can only assign templates to station ranges. So let's start by quickly creating a template that does something. Again, this is pretty basic stuff for RoadEng users, but let's just go ahead, create a new template. I press the Add button, template. I'll give it a name. Let's call it Road Widening Left. I'm just going to, oops, can't spell, can't type, can't spell or type. Widening Left, and there's some other information that is global to the template. The crown slopes, the default crown slopes are set here, and then of course you can control that with Curve Super if you've got curves. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and it's created a duplicate of the template that I had selected. And open that up. Open up this component, template component, and I'm going to go ahead and set the width on the left here to 8, make it quite a bit wider. Take everything else the same. So I've created a new widening left component, template. And now I'm going to come out of the template editor. I won't recalculate the cross sections. I'm going to assign that template to a range of stations. So I do that, going a little fast here. I do that under Edit, Assign Parameters by Range. I go to Templates. I look in the list here and I look for my new template. There it is, Road Widening Left. And I'm going to assign it from station 0 to, let's go to 75. Go ahead and do that. Press OK. Recalculate. And let's simplify things a bit. I'll take this image out of the background. In fact, I'll take the whole background away, so all I can see is the alignment. And come down here, and you can see that the road, in fact, is wider down here on the left side. There it is in the cross section. If I scroll through a few cross sections, yep, it's wider. Pretty straightforward stuff. But I have created a new template, applied it to a section of the road. Now, this discontinuity, probably never want to do anything like that. So we actually have some pre-built templates that do things, and one of them is called a transition template. So I'll just quickly pop that in there. Taper template, and the taper template I'm going to apply to 75 to 100. There it is. Go ahead, recalculate it. And now I've got, from 0 to 75, I've got my new road widening left template. From 75 to 100, I'm tapering it back into my default template. So if you moved along here, if the taper was longer, you'd see the road width transitioning, and then back to the non-transition zone. Here's back to my default template. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward, and I'm sure many of you know about that already. So let's go back to the template editor and just look at a few things. The first thing that's really important about templates is to do with volumes and surfaces. So this is a very simple template. If I hover over one of the legs here, you'll see some information that's displayed in the hover tip, and it's telling me that this leg is part of my subgrade. It's called a subgrade surface. And here is the same. The whole subgrade surface is displayed in red. And then above that I have another another surface, and that's called SRF1. And those are defined by the components of the template. And those surfaces actually define areas. So in here, anything below this subgrade surface, you can see when I hover, I get a fill, subgrade fill. Anything below that surface tells me it's subgrade fill. So each surface actually has two layers or regions that are associated with it. One's a fill area. If I pull the alignment down here, I get a a cut area, and I can shade those areas, which is really a great way to check that your template and so on is working properly. If I come up here and I turn on the shading for fill, same thing. If I came in here, you'd see that this area is SRF1. I can fill that. So it's very useful once you've got a template to check it using this this functionality. Okay, so I've got a subgrade surface, and by the way, it's often, and let's look at another cross section. Here's a cross section with more surfaces. Again, subgrade. Here is SRF1, SRF2, and then the asphalt area is SRF3, I assume. Yeah, sure enough. So it's also useful to change the colors of these things just so you can see them better, what materials are what, so you can track them. I go into options here. I can change these. This, I might turn off the hatching and change its color to black. That's okay. SRF2, maybe change the time type. Nothing particularly exciting here, but it's really a good way to check things. And if I get a design from someone, I quite often will turn the layers on. There they are in different colors. And then I can just hatch all the fill areas. I can see them, and then I can hover in them, and I can go through the sections, get a very quick visualization of what's going on. Now, surfaces and layers. So the way templates work is as follows. There's a thing called a construction sequence, and most templates follow a construction sequence. And what you do is you start off with a ground surface. In my case, this is this black line. That's where it starts. And then the next thing that happens after the template is applied is, I'll switch templates here, switch to this one. So the next thing that's applied when the template is applied is this roadway component. And it forms what's called a merged surface. And if we looked at the merged surface, which I actually can display here, you'll see that it's applied that surface, and it's just created now the composite surface by taking this component and combining it with ground. And if it was in cut, well, let me turn the cut off here. There. You can see that it's cut out the roadway, and at this juncture in the processing, I've stopped it after the roadway, and that's what my merged surface looks like after the roadway. If I now carry on, it applies the ditches, and then finally chops out the slopes. So as the template is being processed, as it's being processed, it's referencing a merged surface, which is representative of how it's actually being constructed. Just going to turn this off for a second. Merged surface, really important concept if you're going to understand templates. So these components, and I don't recommend you do this, are actually made up of other building blocks that make up the template. And I'll just do this again. I don't recommend you do this. Dangerous stuff, but I'm going to customize this roadway component, and you can see that I've got these other items in here, and they're called fragments. And those fragments, you can see, have a surface associated with them. So what happens here is the roadway gets executed first, and in the roadway, the subgrade is actually the first thing that gets executed. So it's what you'd think. You are constructing the road. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to put the subgrade in. Similarly, the ditches component is broken up into surfaces, and I think this one will just have one surface in it. Yeah, subgrade surface. So there is a sequence in which these things are done, and it usually starts with the subgrade, and then surfacing materials are applied after that. So let me just undo this stuff. Not that I've changed anything. Yeah, so there's a very important sequence to things. And in fact, if you change the order of these components, you can also change the behavior quite a bit. If I move this slopes component up to the top, it starts doing funny things. It starts building the slopes first, and then it comes along and puts the roadway in, and then finally it tries to put ditches in, but it's too high. So the usual order that you'd expect is the roadway, start with the roadway, then ditches, and then slopes. I'll talk about more complicated stuff just now, but that is that's what we call the merged surface concept. It follows construction sequence. So let me briefly talk about this some more. These three components here, which many of our resource industry users use exclusively, they're very straightforward, easy to use components. So just click on the properties here, and you can see there's a bunch of stuff that you can enter, such as the road widths, subgrade width, and so on. These components are on both sides of the center line. They're symmetrical, and this ditches component also, if I dropped it down, you see it happens on both sides, and finally the slopes component happens on both sides. So these are, I would call them legacy components. They've been around in our software for many, many years, and a lot of people like them. They're very simple and easy to use. More advanced, if you need to do things that are more, if you need more flexibility, put it that way, you're probably going to want to get into our library components, and they do things like this. I'll talk a little bit more about them in a second. But these components, roadway, ditches, and slopes, legacy components, very easy and quite functional for a lot of things. Let's have a little closer look at those just briefly. Roadway. I'm going to show you something that I see a lot, and I do a lot of support, talk to a lot of customers. And what people do is they turn off auto size here, and they set the subgrade width to some number, and then they independently set the widths of the layer one. So that width there is the width of this top running surface, and this subgrade width is the adjusted width of the running surface. And what can happen here, I don't know if I can off the top of my head make this happen, is that if the subgrade width is not big enough, let's just say 2.8, it won't catch. There, well, that's quite an extreme example, but the running surface is actually extended beyond the subgrade, and it has spilled over. And now if I shade this area, it's all SRF1, which I don't want. I mean, that's typically not what you want. And the solution to that is to turn on auto size here, which says whatever my running surface width is, extend my subgrade so that it accounts for the crown or super elevation of the road, making it wider so it always catches. Nice, simple. That's quite a common problem, especially if the change is very slight. People have got out a calculator, they figured out what their subgrade width should be, and they didn't account for crown slopes or something. They'll get the slope flowing over. I think a lot of the other features in this component are pretty straightforward. Here, this one, attach profile to the top of surfacing. Right now, the profile is attached at this point here, and it's on the subgrade. Many times you'd want to attach the profile to the top of the surfacing. Ditches, very simple component that deals with ditches. Unfortunately, it's not what a lot of people want when they create ditches. They want a component that creates a ditch in the right situation and And this one, if you watch, if I move it just above ground, ditch goes away. Now here I probably would want a ditch, but what it's doing is it's testing this point here, the attachment point.
Well, it looks like we've lost Craig's voice for a minute here, just trying to figure out what's happening. Just hang tight, everybody.
I'll keep talking. Should I perhaps call in again?
Is anyone else having trouble hearing me or Craig? If someone could just put in the question. Oh, okay, you can still be heard, Craig. Keep talking.
Okay, I'll keep talking. I'm actually running way behind here, what I wanted to do. But anyway, I'm going to speed it up.
Thanks, Scott, for telling us.
Yeah. Yeah, so this component is limited. It checks this point here to see if it's underground, pops a ditch in if it's underground. There's better and more flexible ways to do that, which I'll show you just now. Finally, this slopes component, very simple. Just look at its properties. And it's got the slope here. There's a selection of different slopes that you can choose. It's got the slope here set to auto, which means that it looks at the material to pick up its slope. So here I'm in an overburden material, and now I've gone into the rock surface, and the slope has automatically changed at the surface boundary. So it's very useful to set the slopes to auto, especially if you've got rock going on. And those slopes are set in the materials here. Edit ground types. Here are the default cut and fill slopes for those materials. Okay, back to the template editor. So one of the things that you're going to want to do if you're doing anything and need more flexibility is go to our eLibrary and get the components from our eLibrary. I've already done this. I'll just do it again quickly, and I'll overwrite the ones that I have. And the eLibrary contains all sorts of components. It's constantly under development, so new additions are constantly being added. And to give you an idea, there's different road types and situations, ditches, all sorts of things. If you look through it, you'll find all sorts of interesting things. And so the idea is you load the eLibrary and then simply right-click on one of these components that you want to include in your road, come up here, paste it into the template, and now I've got a roadway and this one. So first I would shift this up, and then I would delete this, and then I would right-click copy, right-click paste as new write. And now I've applied the library component into my template. Some important things about library components, and if you look at their properties, you'll get a list that looks like this with parameters that you have to read through to try and figure out. You'll notice if you select a parameter in the list, it shows which legs in the template are affected as best it can. Another important thing is the connection. How does this component connect with your template? And this roadway that I've added, it's connected at the center line. Other options are to connect at a point code or just place the component at the outside. So the connection is very important. You could not have a ditch being connected to the center line. It wouldn't behave very well. So yeah, parameters, very important, and connection. There's another thing. The other thing to notice is that these template components have a side to them. And when I popped this one in, I popped it in on the left, and then I just copied and pasted it and flipped it over onto the right side. So I got a matching set of these things. Yeah, now quickly, one thing you're probably going to want to do at some stage is to save your, once you've got a nice library built the way you like it, is to save them out. And to do that, I just click on this button here, Save Table, choose what I want to save, and if I press OK here, it prompts me for a TPL file. So you can build different libraries. If you're a consultant, you can have different types of road classes, libraries, all sorts of things. Very useful. So quickly, let's look at a couple of components that are interesting. I can't look at them all. There's quite a few, and there's lots to consider. Let's look at the ditch component. I complained a bit that this ditch component here is not good in a lot of situations because it pops a ditch in only when you're in cut at that point. What might make more sense is to look at this point on the ditch and say, if that point's underground, then I'll create the ditch. So that's what our standard ditch library component does. You see there, it disappears the minute I go above. So let's copy that component, delete that, paste it into our template, and I could, doesn't really go with this road cross section, but that's okay, you get the idea. I'll paste it down to the right as well. So I got two ditches. There's quite a few different options in this ditch component. If you look at it, there's a variable that lets you turn it off or on, which is quite useful if you're overriding sections of the road, which I'm not going to talk too much about, but it's possible to override at different stations individual parameters. It's got the obvious things, ditch depth, the in slope, bottom width, bottom slope. It's also got more advanced things, like if you set this parameter to 1, then the ditch depth is measured instead of from the attachment point, it's measured from the centerline point. So you'll get a ditch that's sort of independent of super elevation and crown. Check outside, there's a parameter that instead of checking this point to see if it's underground, it checks this point. If I turn that on, and there's many others that are worth exploring, and they're under the category advanced. If I turn them off, they'll disappear, and I get just the basic parameters for a ditch. So that's a ditch component. I wanted to show you another component I just had the other day. Someone wanted a clear zone, and created a clear zone for them. I'll just copy that and copy that component. I'll come up here, and this is basically a fixed slope for a certain distance. And to see how that works, I'll paste it in here to the left. And now I've got, it's way too big a clear zone. Let's go with something more reasonable, like 12. So there's a slope coming away from the edge of the road at a given slope for a distance to a clear zone that's measured from center line, and this slope is controllable. So there's a clear zone, and it happens in both cut and fill, and very simple. And this, by the way, again, is subgrade. It's a subgrade. It's on the subgrade surface, so this is going to be all subgrade fill volume.
Craig, did you see the question there from Scott? Sorry, I can't hear you, so I'm not really
sorry,
sure if this was
the
addressed.
questions on my screen are very small, and my
So the question is from Scott. I can tell you. It says, okay. How is a special ditch profile defined?
Special ditch profile. I didn't really want to talk about that, but I can outline the process for you. So if you have, you actually need a special component for a special ditch profile. Let's look at the ditches. And here's one here. I think this works. Ditch depth, ditch elevation. That one? No. Okay, it's not. Ditch with vertical tie left. There we go. There's a couple that let you attach ditch to what we call a reference feature. So if I wanted to profile a ditch, I wanted to get drainage or something like that, I would include this ditch into my template. And this item here says feature. What feature do I want to attach the ditch to? And by the way, if you contact us after, I'll send you a full example of this. But essentially, you would go into the module setup area here, alignments. You would create what's called a reference feature, which is going to have your elevations in it. And then you would come back here and attach that template to the reference feature, and it would follow the reference feature. Other ways of doing that are to simply put in a template component that allows you to change the ditch elevation. So here's one here, ditch by elevation. That's the one I started looking at. So this one is the one I just talked about, where you can tie it to a feature. Ditch by elevation basically lets you override the elevation at any station. So you could come in and manually enter station elevation for different points along the alignment to force the ditch to do whatever you want to do. So you have a couple of options there. I would say most people use this one. It's a little simpler, and it certainly it gets the job done. But if you want to use if you have a profile and you want to use that, you can by all means use that. So there's quite a bit of flexibility there. The last component I want to show you is kind of a sexy component. It's what do I have here? I got some wall components. This one's kind of cool. Like it. It makes a Gabion wall. Clear zone. I'll pop it in here right after this. Paste as new left. So this component only comes to life when you're in fill, and it's not scaled very well, but you can see what it's doing. It's creating a Gabion wall. And the parameters of that component, if you go through them, you'll see you can control the block offset, the offset from where it's attached. And this is an interesting thing here. If I move this up here, it's attached after the clear zone. If I move my wall up, you'll see now it's attached right at the road. And my clear zone is doing some funny things, so I might just get rid of that clear zone. So now I have a Gabion wall with an offset and various parameters control the block size and the slope. And again, there's a concept of surfaces. If I shade the area here, that's subgrade volume. If I come in here, I see that my fill wall, my Gabion wall, the material that's in that wall, these are layer SRF5. The material that's in that layer is SRF5, and I could shade that as well. So, yeah, important concept here is I think that there are surfaces involved, and the surfaces are built up sequentially by applying these different components. The last thing I wanted to show you very quickly, and I'm going to switch examples to do this, is a lot of people want to do all sorts of fancy things with their cross sections, and sometimes, I mean, it's overkill. Really, you can draft up a typical cross section. You can put all sorts of features on the cross section, which illustrates to construction people what they need. You don't always need to put that in the template. But here's an example of a slope failure. I think this came from a forestry customer in the States. They had a slope failure here, and they were trying to make a template that did basically regraded this slope to a natural ground slope. And they were having a lot of troubles because on some sections, the slope, let's see see if I can find one. The slope actually went through and reconnected down, further down the slope, and they were fighting with templates, really fighting with them, trying to get them to do what they wanted. And basically what we told them, and they were very happy with the result, was to go ahead and create some fixed sections. So I do that by activating the fixed section window. And then here I'm going to add some sections. I'm going to add some sections. Let's add a few sections starting at 175, I think, 125 to 200. And this is sort of like the heavy hammer. You can go into sections and do anything you want once they become fixed. So I'm going to fix sections between those station ranges at 25-foot spacing, and I'm going to turn on the starter range, which I'll explain momentarily. Just go ahead and do that. So there, I've got 4 sections. There they are. You see how my screen scrolls to those sections. There they are. Now I can go in on these sections. I could change the ground surface, but I assume that was good. I can actually edit the section here and do whatever I want. I can come in, I can add new points, I can get it to behave just the way I want on those sections, and then go to the next section and do similarly. So I'm really taking over control, and of course the volumes, everything follows through. These are volumes, everyday volumes that you can report and use. And the whole idea here is that you've got fixed sections. You can have your way with them. Just do whatever you want. The reason for not using this more often is that if you change the alignment here, the fixed sections don't necessarily follow very well. So if you've got a situation where the alignment is fixed and you just need to fix the sections to get them to do something, this is probably your best and easiest way to do that. Final point, and I've run a little over time as usual, is that with fixed sections, I set a property for the fixed section here that said ignore points in between stations. In RoadEng, you can have different points or sample lines in between those fixed sections. I've told it to ignore those so that for volume purposes, these are the only sections that are used, those spaced sections. That's my presentation. I could go on for days here, and there's lots of options and things to learn, but I wanted to really focus on the concept of surfaces, sections and surfaces, template components, and that's it. Cam, do we have any questions? No. Well, Cam, do you have any closing remarks?
Can't hear you super well, but I think you asked if I had any closing remarks. I don't. But thanks everyone for joining us, and yeah, please sign up for the next webinars, and stay tuned for receiving the link to this recorded webinar if you want to watch it again or pass it on to anyone who missed it. Have a great weekend.
Thanks everyone.